The restaurant was quiet. Adrian Blake sat alone at a corner table, a glass of red wine in front of him barely touched. 2 minutes ago, the woman across from him had stood up, offered a polite but final smile, and walked out the door the moment she learned he had once been a single father. Then the woman at the next table turned toward him, met his eyes, and said it without blinking. "I need a husband tomorrow." Adrian looked at her, looked, and the only thing he could manage was, "Wait, does that mean we'll have to live together?" She was laughing before he could even form a response. Not the polite kind of laugh people use to soften an awkward moment. This was real, unguarded. The kind that made the couple at the table across the room look over briefly before going back to their food. Adrian Blake sat very still, his hand resting near the base of his wine glass, trying to decide whether he had just been made fun of or whether something stranger was happening. The woman at the next table turned her body toward him, more fully, still smiling, and set down her own glass. She had been sitting alone, too. He realized he just hadn't noticed until now. Dark blazer hair pulled back, but not stiffly, a half-finished glass of white wine, and what looked like an untouched bread roll. Someone who came here to eat and ended up not eating. "I'm sorry," she said, and she sounded like she actually meant it. "That was terrible of me. But your face, you looked like I'd just handed you a subpoena." Adrian looked at her evenly. "You told me you needed a husband. Tomorrow. And you immediately asked if we'd have to live together." She tilted her head slightly. "So technically we're both guilty." He didn't smile yet, but something in his expression shifted the tight, closed-off look that had been sitting on his face since the other woman left. He picked up his wine glass and took a slow sip, mostly just to give his hand something to do. The restaurant around them was half full and getting quieter as the evening wore on, the kind of Tuesday night crowd that tends to clear out before 10. "I heard some of it," the woman said more straightforwardly now without the smile. "Not on purpose. The tables are close. I'm sorry about that the way it ended." She said it like a statement, not a question. No theatrical sympathy. Just one person acknowledging that another person had a rough few minutes. Adrian set his glass down. He looked at her for a moment, reading her the way someone does when they've been caught off guard and are deciding whether or not to be guarded about it. Then he said, "It's fine. It happens." "Does it?" she asked. "Happen a lot. More than I expected when I started doing this again." She didn't press. She just nodded once, as if that was enough of an answer for now, and reached for her bread roll. He noticed she broke it in half before eating it the same way people do when they've been sitting alone long enough that small habits become automatic. A minute passed. Maybe 2. The background noise of the restaurant low music, the clink of glasses, a burst of laughter from a table near the bar filled the space between them without pressure. Then she said, "I'm Vanessa." "Adrian?" "Well, Adrian." She gestured at the empty chair across from her. "My table has more bread than I can finish, and yours apparently has an extra chair. I'm not suggesting anything dramatic. Just, it's a weird night for both of us, and sitting at separate tables feels unnecessarily formal at this point." He thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. Then he picked up his wine glass, stood, and moved to her table. They sat across from each other for a moment, without speaking, which somehow wasn't awkward. Vanessa broke off another piece of bread and set the other half toward his side of the table without making a thing of it. Adrian didn't take it right away, but he didn't move it back either. "So," she said, "what happened if you want to talk about it? You don't have to." "She left when she found out I used to be a single father," he said. It came out flat factual. He had said it enough times in his own head over the last hour that it no longer had any particular sting to it, or at least that was what he told himself. Apparently that's a deal breaker for some people before they've even finished the first drink. Vanessa was quiet for a second, not the uncomfortable kind of quiet, More the kind where someone is actually thinking about what you said, instead of waiting for their turn to speak. She knew going in, she asked. It was in my profile, Adrian said. So either she didn't read it carefully, or she thought it would be different in person. I don't know. Either way, he turned his glass slightly on the table. It's not the first time. That's the part that bothers you, Vanessa said. Not just tonight. The pattern. He looked at her. Yeah, he said. The pattern. Vanessa set her glass down and leaned back slightly in her chair, not in a dismissive way, in the way someone does when they're settling in to say something they've thought about. People do that, she said. They hear one detail, and they think they understand the whole picture, like a single data point is a complete story. She didn't say it with outrage, just matter of fact, like she was describing weather patterns. It's lazy thinking, that's all it is. Adrian looked at her for a moment. He wasn't used to that response. He had gotten sympathy before the careful kind people who said the right words, while still keeping a certain distance, making sure their empathy didn't accidentally commit them to anything. What Vanessa was offering wasn't sympathy. It was something more direct than that. Most people don't say it that plainly, he said. Most people aren't willing to call lazy thinking what it is, she replied, and picked up her glass again. I've had enough of it pointed at me that I stopped being polite about naming it. He caught the edge of something in that. Not bitterness, but experience. Something personal, living just behind the words. He didn't ask about it yet, but he filed it away. The conversation shifted gradually the way conversations do when both people stop holding them at arm's length. Adrian talked more than he had planned to. He talked about the years when dating wasn't even a category of his life, when everything he had was organized around work and responsibility and getting through one day, and then the next. He talked about what it felt like to finally have enough stability to try again, and how he'd underestimated what the world would do with a man who had been through what he had. Not hostility exactly, just constant low-grade dismissal. He didn't say it like a complaint. He said it like a report, like a man reading from a field survey. And Vanessa listened the way someone listens when they recognize a landscape they've crossed before, even if they got there by a different road. You keep waiting for the reaction, she said when he trailed off. Adrian looked at her. What? Right now? You keep watching me the way you'd watch someone near an alarm you didn't mean to trigger. She wasn't smiling, she was just being exact. You're waiting for me to pull back. He didn't deny it. It's a reasonable thing to expect, he said. I know, she said. But I'm still here. She said it simply without weight, without making it into more than it was. Just a fact, just an observation about the current moment. The candle on the table between them had burned down to about half. Somewhere behind them, a table of 4 was getting their check and laughing about something. The restaurant was settling into its late evening quiet, the energy different, now slower, more honest. Adrian looked at her and didn't say anything for a beat. He had come into this night expecting very little, and had already gotten exactly what he expected from the first half of it. But this, the woman across from him, the bread on the table, the conversation that had moved from awkward to something he couldn't quite categorize. This was not what he had planned for. You said it's been pointed at you too, he said finally. The lazy thinking. Vanessa's expression didn't change dramatically, but something in it acknowledged the question. She turned her wine glass once slowly on the table. Different detail, she said. Same logic. She left it there, not shutting the door, but not walking through it yet either. Just letting him know the door existed. Adrian nodded. He didn't push. He picked up the other half of the bread roll she had set near his side of the table earlier and broke off a small piece. It was the first time all evening he had eaten anything. Outside the restaurant window, the street had gotten quieter. The Tuesday night crowd had mostly gone home. Inside, the two of them sat across from each other in the warm, shrinking light, and neither of them seemed in any particular hurry to leave. The thing about a conversation that's going well is that you don't always notice it's going well until you catch yourself relaxed in a way you weren't expecting to be. Adrian noticed it somewhere around the time Vanessa refilled her own wine glass and didn't make a production of it, just quietly topped it off and set the bottle back without asking if he wanted any, because she could see his glass was still mostly full. It was a small thing, but small things tend to be the most honest ones. He was watching her more carefully now, and not in the way he had been when she first turned toward him. That first look had been wary, the instinct of someone who had learned to read a room before trusting it. This was different. This was the kind of watching you do when someone keeps surprising you and you're trying to figure out whether to believe it. "You still think I feel sorry for you," Vanessa said without looking up from her glass. Adrian didn't deny it immediately, which was its own kind of answer. "It crossed my mind," he said. "I know." She looked at him then directly. "It's written all over the way you're sitting, like you're waiting for the part where I say something well-meaning and useless, and then check my phone." She set her glass down. "I don't do that. When I'm done with a conversation, I leave. I'm still here." "You said that already," Adrian said. "Because you haven't believed it yet," she replied. He didn't argue with that. There was something about the way she spoke, not softening things, not loading her sentences with reassurance that made it harder to dismiss than if she'd been warmer about it. Warmth he knew how to deflect. This was harder to get around. "I'm not looking for pity," he said, and he meant it as a clarification, not a defense. "I know you're not," Vanessa said, "and I'm not offering any. What I'm telling you is that the way you've been treated isn't a reflection of something wrong with you. It's a reflection of people who make decisions before they've done the work of actually knowing someone." She said it plainly, no flourish, no softness around the edges. "I find that kind of thinking genuinely offensive, not on your behalf, just in general. It's intellectually lazy, and it costs people things they didn't need to lose." Adrian looked at her. "You sound like you've had this argument before," he said. "I've had the losing end of it before," she said, "which is different." That was the second time she had gestured towards something without walking all the way into it. The first time he had let it go. This time he didn't. "What's your version of it?" he asked. The lazy thinking pointed at you. Vanessa was quiet for a moment, not avoiding the question, just organizing it. She turned her wine glass once on the table, a habit he had already started to recognize. "I run a company," she said. "Have for about 7 years. It's done well. By any reasonable measure, it's done very well." She said this without pride or apology, just as context. "And what I've found consistently is that a certain kind of man hears that information and stops seeing me as a person they're getting to know. I become a category, a challenge or a threat or a box they're not sure they want to check." She tilted her head slightly. "The dates don't usually end the way yours did tonight. They're more subtle than that. But they end." Adrian was quiet for a beat. "How? They get polite," she said. "That specific kind of polite that means they've made a decision and they're just being civil about the exit. Or they get competitive. Suddenly everything is about proving something to me, which isn't a date anymore. It's an audition I didn't ask to sit through." She picked up her glass, then set it back down without drinking. Or they just disappear. No explanation, no conversation. Just gone. "And you're supposed to pretend that doesn't add up over time," Adrian said. "Exactly." She looked at him. "You're supposed to just reset each time and walk in like the last 15 versions of it didn't happen." She said it without bitterness, but the weight of it was there underneath. "Which is what I was doing tonight, by the way, before all of this." She gestured loosely at the table between them, at the bread, at the strange little detour the evening had become. "I also had a reservation." "For a date?" Adrian asked. For a date, she confirmed. He canceled 2 hours before. Not the first time with this particular person, so I came anyway, because I'd already planned the evening, and I refused to let someone else's inconsistency rearrange my night. She smiled at that, the dry, self-possessed kind. I was going to eat alone, get through some emails, and go home feeling perfectly fine about it. And then you sat down at the next table looking like a man who'd just been informed of a natural disaster. That bad, Adrian said. Candlelight is not always flattering, Vanessa said, and this time he actually laughed, a short, quiet sound, but real. The restaurant had thinned out considerably now. The table near the bar that had been laughing earlier was gone. A server moved through the room, replacing candles, moving with the efficient quiet of someone wrapping up a shift. The music had dropped slightly in volume, without anyone announcing it the way places do when they're edging toward closing, without saying so directly. Adrian leaned back in his chair. Some of the tension that had been in his shoulders since he walked in tonight had settled. Not gone, just lower. It's strange, he said, meeting someone who actually gets it from the other side. It's not that strange, Vanessa said. Most people are dealing with some version of this. They just don't usually admit it to someone they met 4 minutes ago. She raised an eyebrow slightly. Or 40 minutes ago. However long we've been sitting here. Long enough to finish most of that bottle, Adrian said. Vanessa looked at the wine. That's mostly yours in theory, she said. You just haven't been drinking it. He reached for his glass and finished what was left in it. She watched him do it with that same expression she'd been wearing for most of the evening. Attentive, dry, not unkind. The thing I don't understand, Adrian said, setting the glass down, is what you're supposed to do with it. All of it. The pattern. The accumulating evidence. He wasn't being rhetorical. He was asking something he genuinely didn't know the answer to. At some point you have to decide whether to keep going or whether it's just not worth it. That's the wrong framing, Vanessa said. Is it? You're making it a cost-benefit analysis, she said. Worth it versus not worth it. But what you're actually doing is closing a door because you're afraid of what's on the other side. She said it without cruelty, just clean direct, which I understand, but it's still closing the door. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. That's easy to say, he said, and there was the first real edge in his voice, not hostile, just honest. When you've had enough rounds of it, the door starts to feel like the sensible option. I know, she said. I'm not telling you it's easy. I'm telling you the alternative is worse. She met his eyes. You close that door, and you don't just protect yourself from rejection. You protect yourself from everything, including the things that might actually be worth something. She said it quietly, without drama, the kind of thing someone says when they've thought about it a lot and landed somewhere they believe. Adrian didn't answer right away. He looked at the table, at the remaining bread, at the candle that had burned down to almost nothing. He had come in tonight expecting an hour of awkward small talk, followed by a polite ending and a quiet drive home. He had not expected this. This woman, this conversation, this specific mix of sharpness and honesty that felt less like a first meeting and more like being known by someone who hadn't asked permission to see clearly. You're saying I'm too pessimistic, he said finally. I'm saying you've built a very logical case for a conclusion that isn't serving you, Vanessa said, which is more precise than pessimistic, but yes, essentially. He gave her a look. That's a very diplomatic way to tell someone they're being their own worst obstacle. I thought so, she said, and the corner of her mouth moved. The quiet between them this time was different from the earlier ones, not the quiet of two people feeling each other out, but the kind that settles after something real has been said. And both people are sitting with it. Adrian turned his glass slowly on the table, a habit he'd picked up from her without realizing it. What about you? He said. You're giving me all this clarity. What do you do with your own version of it? Vanessa considered that honestly. I keep showing up, she said. I cancel when I need to cancel. I leave when I need to leave. And I try not to let one person's inability to handle who I am become my problem to carry. She looked at him. Tonight is a good example. I didn't go home. I came anyway. Ate the bread. She glanced at the basket. Talked to a stranger who asked me if we'd have to live together. That's fair, Adrian said. It's very fair, she agreed. Another minute passed. The server came by and asked if they needed anything else, the kind of asking that gently means the kitchen is closed. Vanessa shook her head and said they were fine, and the server moved on. The restaurant was down to 3 or 4 tables, now all of them quiet. Adrian watched Vanessa reach for her blazer from the back of her chair. She didn't put it on right away, just pulled it forward onto her lap the way people do when they're thinking about leaving, but haven't fully committed to it yet. He recognized the motion with more clarity than he wanted to. Something settled in his chest. Not panic, but something adjacent to it. The familiar certainty that this was the part where the evening ended, and he went back to being exactly where he was before just one conversation richer and no closer to anything. It was such a known feeling by now that he almost just let it happen. Almost. He looked at the table, at the empty bread basket, at the 2 glasses, one nearly empty and one just refilled, at the candle that had been burning low for the last 20 minutes and hadn't gone out yet. Vanessa stood and folded her blazer over her arm. She glanced at him once, not a goodbye look, but not an invitation either. Just a look. Then she picked up her bag. She had taken maybe 4 steps toward the front of the restaurant when she stopped. Not dramatically, she just stopped the way someone does when a thought catches up to them before they've finished walking away from it. She turned back toward the table where Adrian was still sitting, one hand resting flat on the surface. You know, she said, and her voice was the same as it had been all evening, measured precise with that thread of something dry running through it. If you ever need another blind date, maybe try one that isn't blind. She didn't wait for him to respond. She turned and kept walking unhurried toward the door. Adrian sat very still and watched her go. The restaurant was quiet enough now that he could hear the soft sound of her heels on the floor, and then the brief current of outside air as the door opened and then closed behind her. He looked at the candle. It was almost gone, just a small pool of wax, with a flame so low it was nearly flat. He looked at the chair across from him, where she had been sitting for the last hour, the slight impression of her presence still in the space. He looked at the door. The candle went out on its own. The candle was out. The table looked different without it, smaller somehow and less forgiving. Adrian sat with both hands flat on the surface and looked at the door that had just closed behind Vanessa Hart. And he did what he always did. In moments like this, he ran the logic. He told himself the evening had been good for what it was. An unexpected conversation. An hour of honesty he hadn't planned for. Something worth carrying home and thinking about quietly the way you think about something that was fine but finished. He told himself that was enough, that it made sense to leave it here. That wanting more from a chance encounter in a restaurant on a Tuesday night was exactly the kind of thinking that led to disappointment, and he had had enough disappointment in this particular area of his life to last him a long time. The logic was sound. The logic had always been sound. He had built it carefully, piece by piece, every time something didn't work out. And it had served him well in the sense that it kept him from hoping too much, and hoping too much had always been the first step toward getting hurt. He looked at the empty chair across from him. At the wine glass she had left behind a small amount of white still at the bottom, at the indentation in the tablecloth where her hand had rested for most of the evening. He thought about what she had said, not the last thing, the parting line that had been clever and open-ended and just ambiguous enough to mean nothing or everything, depending on what he did with it, but the thing before that. You close that door, And you don't just protect yourself from rejection. You protect yourself from everything. He had spent a long time being very good at protecting himself from everything. Adrian pushed his chair back and stood up. He moved through the near-empty restaurant without rushing past the table, where the candle replacement was only half done, past the server, who looked up briefly and then back down at the check he was running. The front door was heavier than he remembered from when he came in hours ago. He pushed through it and stepped out onto the sidewalk, and the night air was cooler than expected, the kind of cool that arrives quietly after 10 o'clock in the city, when the street has finally exhaled. Vanessa was maybe 30 feet away, walking at a measured pace toward the corner, her blazer on now bag at her shoulder. She hadn't flagged a car yet, hadn't reached for her phone. She was just walking unhurried the way she did everything, like someone who had decided on a direction and was following it without needing to perform the decision. "Vanessa," he said it at a normal volume, not a shout. The street was quiet enough that it carried. She stopped, turned around. She didn't look surprised exactly, but she didn't look like she had been expecting it either. She looked like someone holding a conclusion they hadn't fully committed to, yet waiting to see what would replace it. Adrian walked toward her until he was close enough to talk without the street between them. He didn't have a prepared version of what he wanted to say, which was actually unusual for him. He was a man who tended to arrange his words before offering them, but there was something about the last hour that had made careful arrangement feel like the wrong tool for the moment. "I want to start over," he said. "Not the whole night, just the part where you leave." He held her gaze. "You asked me once tonight if I was waiting for you to pull back." "I was. I kept waiting for the thing that would make this make sense as just a polite conversation with a stranger." He stopped, not for effect, but because he was finding the words as he went. "It's not that. I don't think it's that. And I'm tired of treating every reasonable thing like it's probably a mistake." Vanessa was quiet for a moment, looking at him with that direct, clear attention she had been giving him all evening, the kind that didn't soften things or inflate them, just saw them. The streetlight above them was the orange-yellow kind that made everything look slightly warmer than it was. "So what are you suggesting?" she said. "Go back inside," Adrian said. "Not because someone set it up, not because a profile said we were compatible, just because we're two people who've actually talked tonight, and I'd like to keep doing that." He kept his voice level. "That's all I'm suggesting." Vanessa looked at him for a beat that lasted long enough to mean something. Then the corner of her mouth moved, not quite the laugh from earlier in the evening, something quieter than that, but in the same family. "They're probably about to close," she said. "They haven't asked us to leave yet," he said. She considered that for exactly 1 second. Then she turned back toward the restaurant, and he fell into step beside her, and she didn't say anything else about it. They went back inside. The server looked up again with a slightly different expression. This time, something between amusement and resignation, and Adrian gestured at the table in the corner, the one with the burnout candle and the 2 half-empty glasses, and the server nodded and left them to it. Someone lit the candle again without being asked. A small gesture, but Adrian noticed it. They sat back down across from each other. No bread left. The wine was almost gone. The restaurant was down to 2 other tables, now both of them settling into the quiet end of their own evenings, paying no attention to the corner where a man and a woman had come back in from the street and resumed a conversation that had no particular agenda and no scheduled ending. Vanessa picked up her wine glass and looked at him over the rim of it. "So," she said. "So," Adrian said. "You were saying earlier that you didn't know what to do with the pattern," she said, picking up where they had left off as easily as if she'd never stood up in the first place. "I think the answer is, you don't do anything with it. You acknowledge it, and then you leave it at the door and walk in anyway." "Like tonight," he said. "Like tonight," she agreed. "You walked out after me. That's leaving it at the door." He thought about that. You weren't surprised, he said, when I called your name. Vanessa set her glass down and looked at him honestly. No, she said. I wasn't surprised. She didn't elaborate on that, but she didn't need to. Some things are clear enough without a full explanation, and between two people who had spent the last hour being unusually direct with each other, this was one of them. The night went on. The last two tables finished and left, and still they sat. The staff moved around them with the patient, quiet efficiency of people who have seen this before, two people so absorbed in talking that the hour becomes irrelevant. The candle burned steadily, this time not going anywhere. The conversation moved through things unhurriedly, not the careful surface-level exchange of people on a first date, but something closer to the conversation of people who had already cleared the formalities by accident and were now somewhere more interesting. At some point, one of the servers came by and refilled the water glasses without asking. At some point, the music stopped playing. Neither of them noticed exactly when. What Adrian knew sitting across from Vanessa Hart in a restaurant that was no longer really open was that he had almost talked himself out of this. Had almost sat at that table with the extinguished candle and done what he always did, built the reasonable case for staying still and followed it all the way home. He had done it so many times that it had started to feel like wisdom. Tonight it had almost felt like a loss. One person who bothered to look clearly. That was all it had taken to change the shape of an evening that had started in exactly the wrong direction. He hadn't been looking for it. He hadn't planned for it. But there it was, sitting across from him with an empty wine glass and something specific and unhurried in her eyes, and he had the clear, grounded sense of a door that had stayed open just long enough.